Hello and welcome to From Data to Dollars, a podcast about using AI in business. We're coming to you today from New York City. Our goal on this show is to help you navigate this fast-moving, exciting, and often bewildering world. We'll be looking at companies that use AI, talking to their leaders about how they deploy it and scale it, and peering into the future of how AI will change the business world. I'm Gideon Lichfield, former editor-in-chief of MIT Technology Review and Wired.
And I'm Beinat, Global Head of Artificial Intelligence and Data Science for Prosus.
I've been reading about this new tool from Google, or this new feature that lets you take, PDFs, articles, web links, YouTube videos, whatever, and upload them, and it will auto-generate an AI podcast with two hosts speaking from that. So I'm slightly worried that we're going to be out of a job.
Most likely.
Okay, good. Well, at least we got that out of the way. So what I want to talk about today is the million-dollar question of AI, which is, are we in an AI bubble? So you have some signs of this. There was a report from Sequoia Capital in June suggesting that the AI industry is spending $500 billion more on investments in AI infrastructure than it can possibly make in a return this year. There was a note along similar lines from Goldman Sachs. There's all these reports about companies struggling to make a return on investment on AI. So are we in a bubble? What do you think? Yes or no?
Well, yes and no.
Of course you would say that. Well, okay, give me the yes and give me the no.
Well, if you look at, let's say, the narrative for artificial intelligence, you can see that on the one hand, some of the promises are, let's say, exceptional, are exaggerated. So you have to assume that perhaps something else is going to happen. But the same happens from the negative side. So there are some narratives which are, let's say, exaggerated on the negatives. On the other hand, if you look at companies which are in the spotlight at this moment, those that everybody associates to artificial intelligence, NVIDIA or OpenAI and so on, their valuations are very high, but their revenues are also high. Mm-hmm. So that's actually better than the other bubbles in the past. But the most important thing is that what we see in the last 5 years in our companies is that machine learning, data science, and artificial intelligence have delivered real, tangible, measurable value, something that was impossible before. So in that sense, it's not a bubble, it's reality. This is the status quo.
Well, of course, I'm expecting you to give me a positive answer because you're head of AI and data science at Prosus, which is a company that uses AI across its portfolio. But tell us a little bit more about what Prosus is first.
Well, first, clearly, I believe that this is something that creates value, but not because I'm biased, because I can see it. So Prosus is a global technology company. We focus on e-commerce. We serve close to 2 billion consumers globally, from daily needs, like buying food or groceries, to decisions that people make once in their lifetime, like buying a house and everything in between. In our ecosystem, we have about 100 companies in 90 countries. All are technology companies.
All right. So even if we are in an AI bubble, it's not a bubble everywhere. In any technology hype cycle, there's always areas that are hyped and areas that are more reasonable. So give us some examples that you're seeing at Prosus of companies that are really using AI in a beneficial way.
Let me take, for instance, iFood. iFood is our food delivery company in Brazil, a very successful company. And they started deploying various tools and machine learning across the entire organization several years back. And at this point in time, they probably save 100 million per year by using these tools, which otherwise would not be possible.
Okay, and 100 million per year in savings is, what proportion of their revenue roughly?
Well, revenues are around 1.2 billion, so it is material.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so how are they saving that money?
Well, first of all, this is a very mature company in the sense that they started developing teams. That means hiring data scientists. They started organizing around artificial intelligence. They have been training everybody in the organization, from the top leadership to the junior employee that joins the company now, in the value of machine learning, the use cases, and what you can get out of that. So I think it was something that developed over the years. Mm. And you see now that there are about 30 squads of data scientists that work in essentially every single function of the company. So the ones that you expect, those that develop the software, but also logistics, but also marketing, but also legal, everywhere. So the reason why they are successful and they work well is because they took the long view. They decided early on that this could be something that changes the way the organization work, and they went through a process of making that happen over time.
So if you're a user of this food delivery company, how do you see AI showing up?
Well, as a user, you have let's say, in many ways, but the first one is the convenience. First of all, when you open the application to find what you want to order, you are offered things that most likely you want, right? So it's an infinite catalog, therefore you have the opportunity to choose what you want.
So it's predicting your needs, your preferences.
For instance, right? That changes at the time of the day, that changes if it is, let's say, a festivity, if you're ordering food after a soccer game, right? Something like this. So it is very personalized. There are other things that you don't see but happen in the background that make it possible for you to enjoy the service in a very short amount of time. Because if you think about that, you are ordering food and you have it delivered in 20 minutes. It is magic, right? To make that magic happen, many, many things have to go right. And the first is, how long does it take to deliver? Does the restaurant have capacity to deliver in time? What is the time it takes for the courier to go from the restaurant to you? And other strange things like, in many countries in the world, the maps are not precise. So the delivery instruction is, deliver the food behind that stair on the blue door, ring the second bell. Right?
Yeah.
How long does it take to find, let's say, the right address? So we predict everything from the moment you touch the screen to the moment it's delivered. It is predicted. And that makes it possible that you receive it in 20 minutes.
That's quite impressive. So that's really blanketing the whole delivery process in data.
You have to do that. And the reason we have to do that, so this is for what the consumer perceives and experiences. Maybe you don't see it, but that's what goes on in the background. But there's another and perhaps even more important reason, which is the reason why we are so bullish about artificial intelligence in general, but so, let's say, realistic about the impacts. And there is something else that perhaps as a consumer we don't see directly. But if you think about this organization in 2018, it used to deliver about 60 million orders per year. And then you fast forward to 2024, it's over 100 million per month, so over $1 billion per year. So that is, let's say, I'm not sure exactly what the ratio
is. That's like a 20-fold increase.
Let's say 20-fold, something like that. It's a big growth. But what the organization has managed to achieve is not only the growth, is managed to keep the delivery promises, so the quality of service, constant or better. Right? So it means that you, as a user, enjoy the same level of service, even if the company grows that fast. But then the unit cost of delivery has decreased. So you have a multiple of growth, promise is stable, it still remains good, and the unit cost decrease. This kind of outcome would not be possible without automating everything inside the organization, actually having machine learning everywhere. It would just not be feasible. You would have a different organization, different company, that is perhaps much smaller than what it is now.
All right, so when you talk about AI saving at $100 million a year, that's only a part of what's happening, right? Because it's also enabling that kind of growth.
That's absolutely right. So the savings or even the, let's say, additional sales are a narrow, very measurable perspective. And then sometimes we focus on that for good reasons. But in many situations, and in fact, we see it in the more mature organization, it's always the case, it enables growth. If you don't have these tools, you can't enjoy the growth that you have now, and you would have a smaller organization.
All right. What are a couple of other examples of companies in Prosus portfolio that
there are hundreds, literally hundreds of examples that we have. But let's pick one. One of the examples that I like best is the way that OLX uses machine learning to improve marketing effectiveness, which means, in fact, choosing which marketing campaigns to run. OLX, it's a classifieds platform. They serve users from second-hand goods, but also real estate, a very broad set of services. It's about tens of millions of users. What they have done, they looked at data about campaigns in the past, and they created models to predict, given a certain campaign, what is the result because the campaign is run. So you can associate, if I run this campaign, I get this result. If I run this campaign, I get this other result. So before spending the money, they can anticipate how much they're going to receive in terms of outcome. And they can do that in comparison between different campaigns. Because of that, they save about 15%. So it means that for every dollar they spend, they have 15% more benefit in terms of marketing results. Another example, it's Meesho. Meesho is an Indian e-commerce platform. They have 100 million of users, and they use machine learning to reduce the cost of customer support. And they reduce the cost by 90%. Very significant.
That's a lot, yeah.
The last example I want to mention here is it's one that I really care about. It's our AI assistant that we deployed across the group, about 20,000 people using it. And what we have seen over 2 years of usage is that, on average, the time it takes to produce what they used to produce before, the time it takes for execute their work, it's about 1 hour shorter every day. So you have 20,000 employees, they can do what they did before, but just 1 hour shorter of their time. So, in fact, you have 1 hour more per employee at large scale.
For which they can use to play video games.
They could. What, in fact, we see is that they work more, they work better, they do deliver better products, they do more than what they used to before, and then I'm sure they can also have some time for games, but in fact you can see the effect of productivity in practice.
Do you have a way to quantify the ROI that Prosus sees across its portfolio? I mean, do you have a way to quantify how much you're spending on AI and what sort of return you see on it?
So we do. So consider that everything that it is brought into production, it is a result of an A/B testing. So you have the idea about a model, so a recommending system, a fraud detection system, or anything else you can imagine. We bring it in production and we compare the results without the model, and we see if it improves something, then yes, it becomes the, let's say, it is the next status quo. So in that sense, yes, we measure everything. Of course, it is complicated when so many of these models change, for instance, the entire experience end-to-end for food delivery. So that becomes a bit more complex. Having said all that, and we believe that the returns for every dollar invested in AI can have a return about 2 to 5 times. So it's significant, not 10%, not 30%, 2 to 5 times, right? We also invested, obviously, a lot to achieve these results. We don't disclose those numbers, but to give you an idea about the size of growth of, for instance, data science across the organization, back in 2018 when I joined the group, our pool of data scientists was about 60, so it's tiny, right? Now we are close to 1,000, right? So across the group. So you're talking of hundreds of millions of dollars anyway.
All right, so you're saying that Prosus is seeing a return of roughly $2 to $5 on every dollar that it spends on AI, which sounds impressive. So why are so many companies apparently struggling to see any kind of return on investment on their AI?
That's a great question, because if you asked me that question 4 or 5 years ago, I would always say, well, I'm not sure, right? So first of all, it took us a number of years to improve and to change the organization to be able to leverage machine learning and AI at the level that we are doing now. So I think a naive expectation is that you give people the tools and they are going to generate value, right? It is a technical problem first, but in fact, the value has to do with organization. So where do you put the teams, and how do you organize them? Is it a central team? Is it a distributed team? It has to do with training, and when I say training, it is not only data scientists, which is obvious, it is training everybody in the organization. So those that make decisions need to understand why they need to invest or not in this tool. So they need to have a language, or they need to have a basic, let's say, understanding how this works. So that means all the C-levels, all the decision makers and so on, the product managers and so on. So there's an entire process of educating the organization to take advantage of this. It can't happen overnight, and it can happen, let's say, in a sporadic way. It is a process that goes on over time, and many other things like this. So I think the naive assumption is that you have the tool is going to make a difference. Usually it is a wrong assumption.
So how long do you think it takes before a company starts to see a difference?
I think we have seen that in our, let's say, experience that it took years to become proficient and effective at this, but we also started early. So if we were to start now, it probably would be much faster because the tools are better and you would have many more options. There's another example that gives you an idea about the time. It is, again, the AI assistant. AI assistant is something that people use for supporting their daily job in many different ways. It is to create better code. It is to change, let's say, text or go into some problems. So it's very, very, very broad. The moment that you start using it in a fairly shallow way. It's a typical problem that people experience with ChatGPT. Ask a simple question, you get a simple answer, which is not useful, right? So from there, to really tune the tool to what you need to do, we have measured, and it takes about 6 months.
Okay.
6 months of continuous interventions, and then you see the interesting things happen. So, for instance, and that it happened a couple of days ago, marketing team, they say, well, we need to run a questionnaire, and the first thing that guy did was ask the tool, the assistant, create me the questionnaire. It means that you give for granted that you have that tool that you can do all this, right? It's just part of your natural way of behaving. To get there, it takes time.
Right. So how much of this success in using AI depends on having just the right technology, and how much is organizational culture and change management?
That's a great question, because it's, again, our naive way of looking at the world initially was, if you have the tools, well, it is going to be marginal. Yes, it takes deliberate, let's say, attention to that, but it's going to be marginal. We found out time and time again that that's not the case. So it's hard to give a percentage, but if I were to venture a percentage, I would say 20% is the tools. The rest is organization, the rest is culture, the rest is education, the rest is deliberate actions over time. So it is the majority.
Okay, so talk a bit more about that. How did you change the organizational culture at Prosus? What did it take to build something that worked?
We started with education. So we actually, it was a bet early on, and our bet was you need to have every person in the organization, from the, let's say, the junior entry-level associate that started, let's say, just after finishing university, to the CEO, to the decision makers. Everybody in the organization needs to be familiar, comfortable, and know how to make decisions for the C-level, to integrate in products for product managers, to develop them, of course, with data scientists. For that, we had to create our own training programs, and we ran them for some time. So I think it was, I think we ran these programs for about 2 years. Time and time again, that comes back as the most impactful thing that we have done.
The training.
Yes, absolutely. So re-educating, it's a sort of big upskilling of the entire organization at scale. That has been, it's the condition upon which everything else can be built.
Yeah. Okay. So, very often organizations say, if we're going to introduce some new way of doing things or some new technology, let's have a sandbox or a skunk works and develop it there in the hopes that it spreads to the rest of the organization. It sounds like you're saying that approach won't work.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that that's only one element. I think, in fact, we have our own recipe. Our own recipe has actually 7 levers that we touch to make every organization, both the ones that are doing well and the ones that are starting, and we call it AI capable. Over time, we developed, let's call it a recipe. It has 7 elements. It has to do with, so if you want to make an organization good and able to leverage AI, you need to act on talent. You need to act on the way talent is organized. You need to act on experimentation, but also on data, on technology platform, and on speed of implementations. And the 7th one is on strategy, right? So this is an entire portfolio, and at some point during the maturity, so when we started, we focused a lot on education and talent creation, skill creation, great upskilling. Later on, we started focusing more deliberately on experimentation. So it has to do with maturity. When a company, when an organization is more mature, then experimentation becomes essential. So we use tools that we call jet skis.
Jet skis.
Jet skis, right. Jet skis, it's let's say, by analogy, it's a big organization. It has a lot of power, but it's very hard to turn, let's say,
like a
different
container ship.
It's container ship, right? So it has an inertia. If you really want to make big turns and fast turns, you need a nimbler type of organization we call jet skis. Very small projects which are dedicated to testing an idea rapidly, quickly, iterating if it works. If it works from, let's say, 100 jet skis, you make 5 boats, and if one of those works, it becomes the big boat. So you get there once the organization has a certain maturity. But it's also important that this maturity, it's a process, and it's a deliberate process. So the organizations that work well with AI have figured out how to manage that process over time in a deliberate way. And that's something that we had to learn. I think it's probably easier now, but it is the most important thing. Have a control of this deliberate process.
Yeah. So we've been talking about returns on AI investment, and when companies and markets think about returns, they're looking at dollar figures or whatever currency figures. Do you think there are other ways to think about the return on an AI investment that maybe the dollar figures are not capturing?
Well, what the example we discussed before about growth. So there are many situations. In fact, I think perhaps in all the organizations in our group, the ones that are most successful because they've been able to grow in part because of AI, right? So AI enables growth. It's not only reducing costs and so on. If you don't have it, you just don't grow at the level where you are.
Right, like the example you used with iFood.
That's exactly the same, right? That's exactly the same example. The other one is we see the effect of the assistant. So this tool that everybody, well, about 20,000 of our colleagues use. The reduction of time for doing what they used to do, so the 1 hour per day, is one aspect, which is obviously important and so on. But then you go a couple of layers underneath. Why do they think that they can do that? Well, because they can learn faster. They can learn on the job. They can work outside of their area of comfort, their comfort zone. And that's in particular for technology. Simple example, people code in a certain language, but they don't know how to code another one. They can get to that faster and so on. So you have many more intangibles than just the number. Mm-hmm. And over time, obviously they turn out, they appear in the balance sheet. But I believe that that's probably the biggest impact. And in fact, I'm actually convinced that going back to the original question, are we in a bubble or not? I think that we are underestimating AI systematically.
Okay.
I do think that. Because you can see all the conditions that we have brought into the organization for growth, they are because this technology is used well, right?
Yeah. I mean, Gartner publishes its famous hype cycle. And I think last summer of 2023, was when they published the hype cycle showing AI, generative AI, at the very, very peak of the cycle. You know, what they call the peak of inflated expectations, which means that right now we're entering into the trough of disillusionment. And maybe in another year or 2 or 3 years, we'll start to come out the other side and we'll start to see applications that are maybe not as hyped, but are more sensible and successful. Yeah, I mean, it's maybe hard to generalize, but do you have a sense of what are the big things that are going to be showing AI value for companies 2 or 3 years from now?
A couple of things. First of all, I can see how some organizations actually go through the cycle, right? So they were super excited. They started using AI, a year and a half ago after ChatGPT. They make investments. They expect miracles. The miracles do not happen, and therefore nothing works and so on, right? In our case, we started 5 years ago. So before ChatGPT, artificial intelligence was already the status quo. It's not something that we invented. We just took, let's say, the last technology and tried to use it. It's something that was gradually built over time. So we don't see that. We see a gradual, steady growth, which is accelerating, right? So that cycle, we don't see it in our organization. Having said that, what are the things where we see that this is going to have big impact? One of the areas which we, obviously it's core to what we do, but we really care about is e-commerce. So e-commerce was predicated on technologies, right? So secure layer, search, the cloud, mobile, and the first wave of machine learning. And then you have Netflix, Spotify, and all that. Now there's another transition, wave of technology transition, which is more, let's say, predicated on large language models and so on, and multimodality. You can see there the emergence of agents. You can see there the emergence of different type of interfaces, conversational interfaces. You can see how this can change the way you experience products. You can see products in the environment where you want to buy them. You can try things on and so on. So this is going to alter e-commerce radically. And it's not going to do it in 30 years, 20 perhaps. That was the last cycle. It's going to do the change in the next 5 years. So we really count on these technologies to make e-commerce different, and we think that it is where we are going to play a big role.
Okay, well, we're going to have another episode where we talk about e-commerce in more depth. I want to go back to iFood for a second because it's a Brazilian company, and I'm curious, what differences are you seeing in the way that AI is rolled out and applied in high-growth markets like Brazil or India versus some of the others?
So there are a number of specific things that we learn from the countries where we operate. By the way, we have a unique perspective because we have a footprint of about 90 countries, and these countries are in high growth regions. And what we see, first of all, the attitude towards artificial intelligence in the recent years, but technology in general, is very positive. It is considered, let's say, one of the forces that make growth function. It's a positive lever. So that's one thing. The other things that we have noticed is how the talent pools have changed. So let's say 5 years ago, or maybe 10, data science pool, deep technology competence were concentrated in North America, North Europe, UK. So very predictable places. Now you find significant high-quality talent pools in Brazil, in India, in many other parts of the world. So that has changed. And that's a big difference because that enables various things. So one of the other things that we see, which is probably connected, is the growth of startups, companies, which have similar ideas, similar technologies, equally sophisticated to startups that you might find in the Valley or in other places like that. But they have much lower valuations, much more reasonable valuations. So there is an entire ecosystem of companies that are growing outside of the Valley, and that will have a big impact on the growth of technology companies in these areas.
Okay, so to wrap up, what are 2 pieces of advice that you would give to managers in companies that are looking to implement AI based on the experience you've had?
I think the most fundamental one is to consider this as a marathon, is not a sprint. And once you have the technologies available and once you have the minimum talent available, you have to change the organization. So that's what makes this viable. You have to make them able to experiment, as we discussed before. You have to organize the talent in the right places. There have to be another set of other ingredients, which are the 80% that you need to put in place once you have the 20%. So the organization, focus on the organization.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Yuri. You maybe haven't entirely convinced me that we're not in a bubble, but you've certainly convinced me that there are at least some places to look where it's possible to see a good return on AI.
I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you.